About a year ago, I canceled my Midjourney subscription. Today, I'm coming back to it for the first time since. After about a day back inside of Midjourney, I want to talk about why I think this is a model that we should be considering nowadays, especially when we talk about AI film production and style consistency. I'm going to tell you why I left Midjourney in the first place, and why I think that reason says more about how we talk about and think about AI models than it does about Midjourney itself. Then we're actually going to generate some images with Midjourney, and I want to show you guys two different features that I don't think anyone else has really cleanly replicated quite like Midjourney has. And we're going to build a few consistent shots, and I'll talk a little bit about how I put together my edits. Before we get into the video, here's what I was able to make yesterday very quickly using Midjourney, Nano Banana for some light composition and editing work, and then Kling for video generation. You guys can see that Midjourney definitely helps keep a pretty consistent style. Now, again, I wasn't really going for anything specific. The goal here is to talk about how we can stay consistent with Midjourney. But before I get into Midjourney and all the features that it has to offer, I want to say something that I've been saying on the channel for quite some time now. Every time a new model drops, I feel like the comments tend to turn into a discussion, and I think that's totally fair. I think it's a conversation that's worth having, constantly pitting new models against each other, which one is dead now, which one wins, as we like to say. And again, I get it. I think that's a totally valid argument, and it's important to have. I do think the framing on those conversations are generally wrong. Every single new model that comes out, whether it's open source or closed source, is not a new toolkit for us to play with. It's an expansion to an existing and ever-growing toolkit. Every single new model should be treated as not a replacement to a pipeline that you've been building, but a model that could potentially solve a problem within that pipeline. I have tools that are over a decade old that I still use today because they fit in my pipeline production process. New models shipped this year just means you have one more option to play with. LTX 2.5 and Minimax H3 are a really great example of this. LTX 2.5 focuses on speed where Minimax focuses on quality, and the two of them win in two different distinct categories. Because of that, you can't directly compare them, and in either event, it's just two new models for us to have as open source creators. And the reason I bring this up now is because it directly relates to my relationship with Midjourney, and in fact was the very rule that I broke and what caused me to walk away from Midjourney in the first place. So rewinding the clock a little bit, originally the big three models were Dall-E, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion. As time went on, we started to get newer, better models like Nano Banana was coming on the scene, same with Seedream. And once these models came out, I was a student paying $10 a month or so for Midjourney on top of ChatGPT, on top of other subscriptions, and so I decided to take the leap because I was thinking with these new models coming out, we are going to get inevitably better quality and price from some of these new models. I was right back then, but here's the part that I didn't really clock at the time. And the reason why I left is because of the same exact mentality that I just told you guys is wrong. I was thinking that I found a replacement and that a free alternative was good enough for what I was trying to do. So I decided to leap from one model to another instead of using the best that Midjourney had to offer in addition to the new models. That is really what I want to talk about today, and the exact process that was used to create the video you guys saw at the beginning. So why am I even coming back to Midjourney today? Well, I've been doing some research on the AI creator Gossip Goblin. I recently watched his video Pomegranate, which is linked in the description. Go watch it if you haven't, it's really good. And I started doing some digging into how these top tier AI film creators are actually making their videos, because the big problem usually is cinematic consistency, character consistency, environment consistency, and Gossip Goblin seemed to have that nailed down, and the answer was really shocking to me. He doesn't start in Nano Banana or doesn't provide omni reference to videos models like Seedance, for example. he actually starts everything inside of Midjourney, primarily because of two features that we're going to talk about in just a minute. And because of that, I was inclined to come back and take a look, and after seeing what Midjourney has become over a year later, I definitely understand Zach London's reasoning here. I mean, even just scrolling through this explore page, I definitely think Midjourney, even today, is still one of the best models when it comes to creation diversity because of the personalization and style reference features that they have, which I don't think anyone has been able to kind of cleanly recreate yet. So now that we've talked a little bit about the why we're forgetting Midjourney and why I think it's still relevant nowadays, let's see what it actually looks like in practice. I mentioned that Midjourney has two different features that I want to talk about that I think are really powerful. They have a personalization feature and a style reference feature. So now let's start with personalization. So we've talked a lot about LoRa's on the channel before, and personalization for Midjourney is kind of a light version of LoRa training, specifically on the Midjourney models. That's a very watered down way of explaining it, but that's essentially in practice what it does. I have a couple different personalization profiles that I've made, one for their V8 model as well as a few for their V7 model. And we're going to create a new profile here just so you guys can see how this works. We'll click into this new one that we created, and essentially all we have to do here is really go through and pick the images that speak to us the most and are focused on the style that we want to try and do. Now this can take a minute to go through and pick the images that kind of fit the vibe that you're going for, but it definitely makes a massive difference. And we can see that as we're scrolling through, the images that are getting recommended to us are more and more the style that we're going for. And obviously we talk a lot about AI influencers on the channel, and Midjourney is not a bad model for that either. They do have an omni reference feature, and unfortunately it's not a direct copy of your character like we do with Nano Banana, for example, but it is a pretty interesting way to generate different face variations or kind of more influencer style images that you can face swap onto, for example. But once we've selected the number of images that we need, we can click Start Creating. And now we can see this personalization button is turned on. So if we expand this, we can see the profile that we just created is selected. One cool thing about Midjourney is you can also mix different personalization profiles together, which is kind of like mixing LoRa's a little bit. And this is why I think Midjourney is so powerful nowadays, because this is a feature that I don't think I've seen from any other model. At least not to my recollection. If there's one that you guys can think of, please let me know. I know Higgsfield has something similar to this, but personally, I find Midjourney's better than what Higgsfield has. So what we can do now is actually turn this off just to try a prompt with the kind of base Midjourney V7 model. So we're going to try this prompt, a beautiful Wisconsin golf course with purple and yellow flowers, patio overlook. And let's run this to see what we get. Another cool thing about Midjourney is that for every prompt you send, you actually get 4 images back. And they do have additional features here that you can use to actually control that. So stylization is a good one, and variety is also a good one. It's also called chaos, which basically helps you get more variation. And so what we get is something like this, which is obviously, you know, pretty simple, but I think it's a really good prompt to show off the base Midjourney model. Now, again, like Midjourney is not the best model-wise. There is obviously some weirdness here, like chairs are kind of duplicating and morphing and looking a little weird. But again, you know, coming back to the overall point that it's an expansion of our toolkit, not the full toolkit itself. Point of using Midjourney inside of production pipelines is for style visualization, composition, with characters being added with Nano Banana or other models. An additional cleanup kind of being done that way rather than relying fully on the Midjourney output for your final image that you feed to a video model, right? So now let's go ahead and click this prompt to copy it back to our text bar. And what we can do is click the drop down here on personalization and enable the personalization profile that we just created. Now we can submit this and see how different our generations are. Now another thing is that Midjourney is very fast, which again just supports the reasoning to use this as kind of a underlying model for testing, not necessarily your final output. So we can see how our images have changed, right? Our composition's a little bit different, a little bit more kind of vibey, nature focused, which are the images that we were selecting. Here's another one that's really solid and definitely looks pretty realistic, but we can even take this a step further. So let's go ahead and click on the explore page here. Now we can try and find an image that has a vibe that we really like. So for example, I really like this one. Let's see if we can potentially use this. At the bottom here, you guys will see these different use cases. So we can use it as an image reference, a style reference, or a prompt reference. I'm going to go ahead and click style. So we can see that this image was now added as a style reference. So if we go back to our create tab, click our prompt again, our personalization personalization on and hit submit, you can see again how different the generation we get back is. Another thing I will say too, while we're waiting for this generation to come through, is that the explore page alone is really interesting to look through for anybody kind of exploring creative use cases for AI and creative styles. There's just so much variation on this platform that even just looking through their explore page is extremely interesting from a creative inspiration perspective, and just to see the breadth of what this model can do. Like, I would be interested to see what other model could generate something like this. Here's another really cool, really interesting creative image. A lot of these as well usually have the prompt included as well as any additional parameters that were used, so you can see exactly what people did and even use their prompts if you want to, or build off of them, which is really cool. Here's another really interesting image. Let's go ahead and look at our create tab and see what we got back, and now you guys can really see how different the images are. A lot more liminal, a bit more unsettling. Definitely seeing a lot of that grain and the saturated colors for sure, the dark contrast. So the same prompt with 3 different settings gave us a bunch of different results, and you guys can kind of see how this can be used to control a specific style. Now, the one thing I will say with Midjourney is that sometimes when you start stacking too much stuff is where it gets kind of confused and can generate some really incoherent images. And I noticed it typically tends to happen with the stylization. There's another way that we can do stylization. Let's go ahead and close this. We'll add our prompt back. Let's go ahead and click on explore again and scroll back to the top. Now, we were in the images tab, but if we click on styles, there are actually kind of pre-made styles that we can select from that can really drive our image into a specific type of style. So let's try this one. For example, we can go ahead and copy this code and we'll see that it's added to our prompt. We can leave our personalization on just to see how these two mix, and let's go ahead and generate again. And by the way, guys, I'm not sponsored by Midjourney or anything. I just find this as a really interesting conversation to be had nowadays, especially in light of the LTX 2.5 and Minimax H3 videos I just posted, where there were a lot of conversations on which one's actually better. I really don't think it's a conversation of what's better, it's what's better for your particular use case. And if your use case is creating an AI generated film and you want to nail down a very specific artistic style, which is typically difficult to do with a model like Nano Banana or Seedream, I think Midjourney is a great option that a lot of us have forgotten about, because it's no longer the loudest in the room in competition that continues to outgrow and outpace a small Midjourney team. Like, for example, we can see this looks great, you know, very painterly, and definitely took inspiration from our style reference. Now, what if we do the same thing with the same style reference, but with personalization turned off, and see what that gives us? While that's generating, we can take a look back here at the generations I did for the video that you guys saw at the beginning of this. And I'm going to go all the way to the beginning so you guys can see the progression of how this happened. So it started off with a basic prompt as well as an Omni reference and my profile, exactly like what we were just trying. And that was giving me images like this, which were kind of meeting the unsettling vibe that I was going for, but we can see a lot of kind of bad grain and such. So then I started messing with the profile, and that gave me a little bit of a different look, but I still wasn't entirely satisfied. I tried again, and eventually I got this image, which was exactly what I was looking for. Then I kept building, going shot for shot, and you guys can see how the style and environment has really stayed the same without needing to take this image to Nano Banana or create a bunch of environment reference images for Nano Banana to use. It was all maintained just from the prompt and the references that I provided. Same goes here, right? Definitely seeing that same vibe coming through. And with these images, I wasn't quite getting what I was looking for. The problem sometimes with Midjourney though, like I was saying, when you start stacking stuff, it really locks you into a particular style, especially coming up to here, right? With these images, I was trying to create an astronaut wearing a white astronaut gear, kind of like the typical NASA gear, shooting a flamethrower into this field, and for the life of me, I was just not able to get an image that had that. And that's why part of this process is creating clean plates with Midjourney that you then pair with a character reference sheet to actually add a character into your Midjourney plate. Because again, Midjourney is an extension of our toolkit, not the full toolkit, just like Nano Banana is not the be-all end-all, and neither is Kling or Seedance or whatever it may be. And so as I kept generating, I pretty much just kept the style the same once I nailed down the vibe that I was going for, and that allowed me to create a video that was pretty consistent without needing to do a lot of prompting work. And that's really the power that I see here, is nailing down your style, nailing down the vibe, and then building from there, using other models to edit on top or make changes. images, but keeping the base inside of Midjourney. And one other thing that we haven't even talked about that I haven't used yet as another layer of direction is a mood board. So you have so many different ways that you can leverage Midjourney here. I think this is a really cool model that we've forgotten about for sure, and wanted to bring it up especially as AI filmmaking really starts to get on the rise nowadays, with creators like Gossip Goblin out there really starting to set the stage for what high value AI production looks like. And Midjourney was one model that he cited consistently throughout his interviews, and so I wanted to chat about it a little bit here today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you found this interesting, please consider liking and subscribing. You guys can also check out our Patreon, which is linked in the description below. We also have an AI influencer course that you guys have been absolutely loving, so if you are looking to understand more about how you can start an AI influencer and get the account off the ground, consider checking out that link in the description below. Thank you guys. I will talk to you soon.